What distinguished Star Trek from all other science fiction programs of its day wasn't the futuristic stage sets, the costumes, or even the spacefaring adventures. What distinguished it was its optimism. When most future stories were full of devastation, nuclear holocausts, or desolate wastelands, Star Trek had the courage to imagine a better future. It envisioned the future of Earth as a utopia at last, where income disparities, racism, and discrimination were no longer ancient history that humanity had left behind. Gene Roddenberry's vision for the 23rd century was ambitious, revolutionary, and sincerely optimistic. To the audiences of the troubled 1960s, this wasn't science fiction, it was a promise of what humanity could do if all of humanity worked together. But Star Trek was never more than a television show. It became an international phenomenon, one that motivated generations, set records, packed theaters, and created stars out of its performers. And yet, despite all its majesty, the original series also bore a treasure trove of secrets. Behind those flying bridges and gleaming alien uniforms were flubs, blunders, secret details, and sheer mistakes, moments that managed to evade the editors and onto history. To the keenest-eyed fans, they became small jewels concealed in the universe of the Enterprise. From continuity gaffes to off-screen wars, the history of Star Trek is as action-packed as anything that occurred on camera. Today, we'll pull back the curtain and take a closer look at Star Trek, the original series, its birth, its struggles, its secrets, and the mistakes fans were never supposed to notice. This is the untold story of how a canceled show became one of the most influential franchises in the history of television. The birth of a vision. The story begins in the early 1960s. Gene Roddenberry, a vet bomber pilot who became an LAPD cop before becoming a screenwriter, was fed up with the superficial, formulaic TV scripts that filled the airwaves. Roddenberry thought the public was prepared for something bigger, something that posed real questions about war, peace, justice, and mankind's place in the universe. He pitched his concept to the executives as Wagon Train to the Stars, a space western. The series would chronicle the travels of a starship and its crew as they traveled through the galaxy, experiencing new worlds and grappling with philosophical issues. That starship was the USS Enterprise, commanded by Captain James T. Kirk, swaggered and intensely played by William Shatner. By his side was First Officer and Science Officer Spock, the half-human, half-Vulcan actor Leonard Nimoy played, whose logical brain proved the ideal antidote to Kirk's passionate impulses. Joining them was Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy, played by DeForest Kelley, whose emotional intensity frequently warred with Spock's logic, creating one of television's most enduring character pairings. The three of them made up the core of the show. Each show started with the now legendary phrase, "To boldly go where no man has gone before." The promise of discovery and exploration laid the groundwork for tales that varied from action-packed space battles to very philosophical examinations of ethics and morality. The location was the Milky Way galaxy between 2266 and 2269, a chronology that allowed authors to pose grand questions regarding war, peace, race, and technology, without necessarily finger-pointing at the politics of the 1960s. But anyone who viewed knew the allegories were there. However, before the world got to witness any of this, Star Trek had to battle for its survival. The struggle to get on air. In 1964, Roddenberry sold his concept to Desilu Productions, then the leading independent studio. Herbert F. Solow, Desilu's production chief, was seized by the possibilities and signed Roddenberry under a development contract. But Lucille Ball, the celebrated actress who co-owned Desilu, was actually Star Trek's guardian angel. Although she acknowledged that she didn't get the idea herself, she trusted Roddenberry and encouraged her company to assume the financial risk. Without her support, Star Trek may never have moved beyond the drawing board. The original pilot, The Cage, was shot in 1964 with Jeffrey Hunter playing Captain Pike. The episode was smart, ambitious, and visually beautiful. But NBC suits found it too slow, too intellectual for the masses. Usually, a failed pilot was a dead end. But NBC did something remarkable. They requested another chance. The second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, brought in William Shatner as Captain Kirk, and the makings of the show began to come together. With Kirk, Spock, and an action-filled tone, NBC greenlit the show for the 1966 season. Nevertheless, the journey wasn't smooth. Desilu was financially stretched thin, juggling mission, impossible with Star Trek. The show was costly, ambitious, and complex to make. NBC was always concerned about ratings. From the start, Star Trek existed on the cancellation list. Building the crew. When Star Trek finally went on the air on September 8, 1966, on NBC, audiences saw a cast unlike any other on television. George Takei as Lieutenant Sulu, James Doohan as Chief Engineer Montgomery, Scotty Scott, Nichelle Nichols as Lieutenant Uhura, Grace Lee Whitney as Janice Rand, and subsequently Walter Koenig as Ensign Chekhov, each brought diversity, charm, and humanity to the bridge crew. Nichelle Nichols' casting was particularly historic. As a black woman in charge on a futuristic starship, she was shattering television barriers. She inspired millions of viewers, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who personally asked Nichols not to leave the show when she thought about going back to Broadway. King explained to her that the role embodied hope, and that she was a hope for young black children to look up to. Nichols remained, and history was created. While that was happening, James Doohan developed the indelible Scottish engineer Scotty, who could always get miracles out of the Enterprise's engines. Takei and Koenig provided representation for Asian and Russian characters in an era of Cold War hostilities. The Star Trek cast was not only acting, it was a vision of a future more inclusive and unified. Struggles behind the scenes. Though revolutionary in its time, Star Trek underperformed with ratings. Americans just didn't know what to do with it. NBC shuffled it around its schedule, constantly damaging viewership. It was costly to produce, and executives felt it wasn't worth it. After 3 seasons and 79 episodes, NBC canceled it in 1969. For most programs, that would have been the end of it. But Star Trek was not like that. Syndicated in the 1970s, it was reborn. Reruns brought the series before millions of new viewers, making it a cult phenomenon. Fan conventions started springing up, attracting thousands of fans. It was during this second existence that Star Trek evolved from canceled TV show into cultural phenomenon. Costumes, props, and aliens. Much of the magic of Star Trek was supplied by its alien designs, costumes, and props. Costume designer William Ware Tice designed the classic Starfleet uniforms that are still easily recognizable today. His statement-making designs for alien life forms provided the galaxy with a feeling of diversity and culture. Makeup designer Fred Phillips and prop master Hua Chong also contributed to the legacy. Chong creating props such as the communicator, which would eventually inspire the modern-day cell phone, the tricorder, and even iconic creatures such as the Gorn. All of these creative innovations provided Star Trek with its familiar appearance. The Enterprise bridge wasn't merely a set, it was a realistic world in which fans could transport themselves serving with Kirk and Spock. Cultural impact and fun facts. Star Trek was more than entertainment, it was a reflection of society. The racially charged kiss between Uhura and Captain Kirk in 1968's Plato's Stepchildren was a benchmark moment on television history, taking place only 1 year after interracial marriage was legalized in the United States. The series also featured the idea of the Prime Directive, a fictional regulation that keeps the Federation from interfering in other societies. This was a not-so-subtle call to account of America's meddling in other countries as Roddenberry and his writers condemned America's involvement in foreign countries. Even Martin Luther King Jr. and actual NASA astronauts were touched by Star Trek. NASA ultimately named its first shuttle Enterprise because fans lobbied for it. Star Trek inspired innovations from cell phones to tablets and even voice-commanded computers. Mistakes, bloopers, and behind-the-scenes secrets. But as great as the future looked in the vision, reality was far from ideal when it came to making television in the 1960s. With low budgets and tight shooting schedules, small errors always fell through the cracks. Dr. McCoy's shirt would switch between takes. Food props flipped from bowls to plates. Kirk's handcuffs inexplicably moved from one take to the next. Entire crash mats rolled out in fight scenes. Spock's fake ears occasionally showed seams. Tape markers supposed to direct actors could be observed on the ground. Continuity mistakes in haircuts occurred when reused old footage was seen. Even the credits once read George A. Rudder's title as script supervisor rather than script supervisor for 13 episodes. Eagle-eyed fans spotted these errors, but far from spoiling the show, they became part of it. Subsequently, blooper reels appeared with Shatner, Nimoy, and Nichols laughing, cursing, or crashing into doors. While Nimoy himself detested these reels being screened publicly, fans loved them. They made the Enterprise crew appear more human, demonstrating that even legends err. Legacy beyond television. While Star Trek, the original series itself, ended in 1969, it never ceased to influence. It spawned animated shows, 13 films, and 11 spin-offs like The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and others. Its actors, Michael Dorn, Jonathan Frakes, and Majel Barrett Roddenberry, became legends in their own right. Even in death, the tradition endured. Gene Roddenberry, Majel Barrett, and Nichelle Nichols each had parts of their ashes shot into space, their eternal resting place among the stars that they had longed to touch before. The charm of imperfection. In hindsight, Star Trek's mistakes are not humiliations. Instead, they're gems. They serve as a reminder that even the best works of art are created by humans with all their imperfections and shortcomings. Viewers who watch the series now often enjoy catching a blooper or a continuity error, as if discovering a secret that connects them to the crew and cast. William Shatner himself once remarked that the bloopers reminded everyone of the fact that beyond the serious Enterprise missions, there were real people laughing, stumbling, and doing their best. And maybe that's why Star Trek has endured, not because it was flawless, but because it gave us the perfect notion of the future. Conclusion. From its early days as a flailing TV pilot to its transformation as a worldwide cultural phenomenon, Star Trek, the original series, has had a trajectory as Hollywood as any of its own space epics. It broke rules, inspired scientists, foresaw technology, and offered hope to millions. And it made errors along the way, visible crash mats, dropped props, sliding prosthetic ears, but they became part of its lore. Ultimately, Star Trek isn't merely about venturing onto strange new worlds. It's about presenting us with the best of humanity, with all our flaws intact. It serves to remind us that even when we mess up, we can still reach for the stars. So, the next time you sit down to watch the exploits of the Enterprise again, take notice. Between Kirk's braggadocio, Spock's reasonableness, and McCoy's zeal, you may catch an error that made it through. And when you do, smile. Because those small flaws are what make Star Trek not only legendary, but human. Live long and prosper.